Hey, welcome. Today we are diving into the world of Rastafari. We're going to go way beyond the symbols you might already know to really get into its history, its core beliefs, and the incredible impact it's had all over the world. So, yeah, let's get into it.
When you hear the word Rastafari, these are probably the kinds of images that pop into your head, right? But honestly, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Every single one of these symbols is rooted in a really deep history of identity, of resistance, and spirituality. So what is the real story here?
Well, to figure that out, we're going to break it all down into four parts. First, we'll start with its beginnings in Jamaica. Then we'll get into the pillars of the faith itself. After that, we'll see how those beliefs are actually lived out day to day. And finally, we'll track how it went from this small island movement to a global one.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Our story kicks off in Jamaica, back in the 1930s. This was a time and a place that was just ready for a powerful new kind of spiritual awakening.
This timeline really shows you how fast this whole movement came together and the huge challenges it faced right from the get-go. So Rastafari pops up in Jamaica in the 30s. And then boom, 1934, a man named Rastafari has this major vision that really lights the fuse. But those early years, man, they were not easy. The movement was met with serious persecution, both from the colonial government and from established churches that saw this new faith as a threat.
So the key person at the center of this whole origin story is Rastafari, who is also known as Leonard Howell. He's really seen as the founder of Rastafari, and pretty much the entire movement is built on this incredibly powerful vision he said he received from God, a vision that announced a Black Messiah had arrived. And that Messiah, according to this vision, was Haile Selassie I, the Emperor of Ethiopia. Now for Rastafarians, he is not just some political figure, no way. He is revered as the living, breathing embodiment of God, who they call Jah, and the fulfillment of a long-awaited prophecy. This belief is the absolute cornerstone of the faith.
Okay, so with that history in mind, let's jump into our second part. We're going to explore how that origin story shapes the fundamental principles that really guide the Rastafari faith. You can really boil the faith down to four main pillars. First, like we just talked about, is the belief that Haile Selassie I is divine. That leads directly to the second pillar, the idea that Africa is the promised land, or Zion, and that followers have to return. Third is a really strong rejection of Western materialism, which is seen as corrupt. And that flows right into the fourth and final pillar, the importance of living in harmony with nature. And this right here really lays out the core spiritual conflict. On one side, you've got Rasta values, and on the other, you have what Rastas call Babylon. Babylon basically represents Western culture, and it's seen as a system totally built on materialism and corruption, a force that's constantly working against spiritual truth and African identity.
So, it's one thing to have beliefs, but how do you actually put them into practice? Let's get into our third section, living the Leviticity, which is the Rasta term for their whole way of life. This is where the faith really becomes visible in everyday life. It all starts with Jah consciousness, just that daily awareness of God. It's expressed outwardly with I dread, wearing dreadlocks as a symbol of resistance. It's lived in the community through the lion's share, this principle of equality and making sure everyone contributes. And of course, it was given a global microphone through reggae music, which spread its message of justice and identity all over the planet. And let's be clear about dreadlocks, because this is so important. They aren't just a hairstyle. As this idea here explains, they are a deeply political and spiritual statement. They represent a total rejection of Babylon's rules of conformity and a proud symbol of resistance against oppression. Now, from these really powerful roots, the movement didn't just stay in Jamaica. For our last section, let's take a look at how Rastafari grew into this diverse global phenomenon that it is today. You know, it's really important to get that Rastafari isn't just one single monolithic group. As you can see, it has a bunch of different branches, like the Nyabingi, the Nation of Rastas, and the International Rastafarian Congress. And each one has its own unique interpretation and focus. And you can't talk about its global growth without talking about the key people who powered it. We've mentioned the founder, Rastafari, but even before him, the ideas of a political leader named Marcus Garvey were a huge influence when it came to Black pride and the idea of returning to Africa. And then later, of course, musicians like the legendary Bob Marley became its most famous advocates, carrying that Rastafari message to every single corner of the globe. So, if there is one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this.
Rastafari is so much more than just music and a hairstyle. It's a complex spiritual movement that's all about the search for identity, a powerful stance of resistance against oppression, and a deep, unbreakable connection to African heritage. And all of that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In a world that just feels so dominated by consumerism and material things, what can the Rastafari principle of rejecting Babylon actually teach us today? It's a question that's definitely worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me.